Hi, my name's Sarah Bradley, and I'm going to talk you through the webinar on moving staff towards experts in the context of online teaching. So the context of this webinar is within the Digital ACE project, which has been designed to support ACE providers on the next stage of their technological journey. So really, it's all about how can you develop your digital capabilities so that you can support your learners, but also support your staff to support your learners. And there's a link there for more information for the Digital ACE project. So the purpose of this webinar is to explore some practical ways that you can move your staff towards expert in the context of delivering our learning online. So that's very specifically what we're looking at. And the idea is that by the end of this session, you're going to have an understanding of the risks and barriers to your staff's development. You're going to be able to identify strengths in your organisation, which you can leverage. And lastly, you're going to consider some practical steps for how you can move your staff along their technological journey in terms of improving their skills and confidence in delivering online learning. So just to give you an idea from a previous session of where other professionals in the industry, where their worries lay, this was the poll that we did in the live sessions, and it was about what your key concerns were about developing your staff towards expert. And having delivered a couple of these sessions, this is representative of the kinds of things that we worry about when we're trying to increase the skill set of our staff. And you'll see there that the two standout issues are that our teaching staff lack the necessary digital skills to cope with online teaching, and also that our staff are experiencing overload and anxiety around the changes and around what we are asking them to do in terms of new modes of delivery. You'll notice then that the next ones that sort of come up are limited resources, money or time, and then also a lack of technical expertise and also tech overload. So that just gives you a sense of hopefully some reassurance that whatever challenges you're facing are unlikely to be unique, and other people will be facing the same. So just a welcome from me then. I work for Buckinghamshire Adult Learning. I'm the Digital Skills English and Maths Coordinator, and my background is computer science and business, and I'm also a certified Google trainer as well. So we're going to break this webinar into two sections. So the first part of the session, we're going to, I will discuss barriers and encourage you to consider the assets that you have, and obviously to have a bit of a think about what other people are doing. The second part of the session is all about the plan of action. How does an outline plan of action look, and what are the practical ideas, links and resources that you can use in order to increase your staff's technical abilities? So this is the poll that we use in the live sessions, and it's just a prompt to think about your starting points. So I haven't given you results of this, but I'd just like you to pause for a moment and have a think about your teaching staff and their ability to deliver online learning. And the statements that I'd like you to consider are whether or not you agree or disagree with these statements. The quality of our online teaching is as good as our in-person teaching. I have staff who are expert in aspects of digital teaching. I have thorough knowledge of my staff's specific development needs. And lastly, I can meet the digital development needs of my staff promptly and cost effectively. The interesting one from the sessions that we've run live on this are that colleagues have persistently rated I have staff who are expert in aspects of digital teaching quite low, which is really interesting, and something that I'd like to just highlight. If you felt that that is quite a low one for you, is that I very specifically put in aspects of digital teaching. And so even if you graded that one low, that you don't feel that that's a particular strength in your organisation, I'd just like to highlight that the reason I asked whether or not you have staff who are expert in aspects of digital teaching is because it's very rare to have staff who are experts across the board. And it's really leveraging those pockets of expertise is going to be a running theme throughout this webinar. So I just wanted to draw attention to that one. So the benefits of upskilling our staff. Well, obviously, first and foremost, if we upskill our staff, we can upskill our learners. And by giving our learners confidence, they are able to access the actual subject we're teaching if that subject isn't digital skills. Also, we can access more learners because it allows us to leverage various delivery modes and be able to reach more learners through what we deliver. It also has benefits towards staff retention. It gives us continuity in the event of further disruption, and it also allows our staff to gain transferable skills. So that may not be a complete list, but if you think there are other benefits, then obviously, consider those as well. But there are huge benefits to upskilling staff that go beyond just directly giving our staff the ability to do a specific skill. So culturally, it's a really positive move as well, and shows investment in your staff. So what are we actually asking of our staff? Regardless of your organisation, regardless of your staff, what we're essentially doing is we're taking our excellent drivers, we're taking our staff who are great teachers, and we're putting them in a brand new car. And if you are a driver and have ever sat in a hire car for the first time, you will recognise that feeling of just that second where you think, well, where is everything? And you're not too sure how to open the petrol cap, or you do the wipers instead of the indicators because they've swapped sides, or you just can't quite quickly find the button for the radio or the aircon or whatever else. And it's that feeling, that's what we've done with our tutors. So we've got to take our excellent drivers, we've got to put them in a brand new car, and we're expecting them to drive just as well as they did before. And that's the bit that we just need to acknowledge. And the way that we get better with that is practice. There's no other way. It just simply requires practice until you get the hang of where everything is. So just to lay that out as a sort of accepted position, that's where we are. And it's a very important message for us to get across to our tutors, particularly if we have tutors who are feeling anxious about the fact that they are, good or outstanding teachers who now suddenly feel that the rules of engagement have changed. So it's just an acknowledgement, and it's very important that we acknowledge that to our staff. So the barriers that our staff might face can be quite wide-ranging. So I don't want to go hugely into depth with this because it will be very personal to you, and I'd like you just to sort of think through which ones are the really standout issues for your staff. But we want our teaching staff to be as good online as they are in class, but some things prevent that. And what we need to do is try and tap into, for our staff, which things are preventing that being the case. So some of the barriers that your staff might be experiencing, it could be organisational. Perhaps you don't have a very big support structure. If you've never done anything online before, this is all going to be brand new front to back, and your support structure may not be in place. You may also, linked to that, have a lack of in-house technical expertise. It may be that things happen so fast, you haven't got a clear statement on best practice or approach. You may not have a VLE, virtual learning environment, that is suitable. And also there can be an issue of lack of recognition of the problem. There can be heads in sand. There can be a sort of avoidance of hoping that this all goes away, and that maybe we don't need to invest too much in it. So there can be just a cultural, attitude towards it as well, that from tutors or from management as well. Emotionally, a move to online teaching creates a very different set of expectations for tutors. It's a role as a facilitator rather than an instructor. It's very much less personal in terms of the way that you manage learners, and that can be extremely unsettling. And creating those personal links online is a very different skill to how we would do that in person. Some tutors may just be resistant to change. There can be a fear of judgment, as I mentioned before, particularly if you're an outstanding or good tutor before, and then suddenly you're in a new environment. It can be very unsettling, and it's not a pleasant feeling. That can have a knock-on effect on confidence. There's an element of overwhelm. It's new skills. There can be external factors that we're juggling. I mean, lots of us obviously are juggling homeschool, supporting parents or neighbours or friends, and also, uncertainty about the future and all the general anxiety that goes with this kind of situation. The other thing is we have to acknowledge that some tutors won't necessarily have an incentive or a motivation to pick up these new skills. Some tutors will naturally be very keen and love the opportunity and grab it, but some will not. And that is something else, again, that we have to bear in mind. In terms of our technical barriers, these were on really safe ground with, I'm sure we're all familiar with this, slow or dodgy internet connections, old technology, laptops that just simply can't handle, video calls very well. Obviously, we've got the lack of digital skills that some of our staff and learners might experience. Also, tapping in again into the overwhelm concept. There are so many technical tools for us to choose from. How do we zoom in and just know which ones to try without getting completely overwhelmed by it? And also, the other problem that you'll face within your staff is that the needs are very diverse. And so while one member of staff might have a expertise in online delivery, they might be very, very weak in online assessment, and you might get the reverse in a different member of staff. And it's these spiky profiles within our staff that make it very difficult in terms of what we offer for CPD. Means that we have to be very sort of personalised in terms of what we offer and really zoom in and keep things to bite-sized chunks. It's not one size fits all. We can't just increase the digital skills of our staff as a whole because their profiles are very spiky, and we can disengage staff by offering training that isn't valuable or not personalised enough to them. So we just need to be mindful of that. And lastly, environmental, really, which is the whole situation barriers that we're facing. Is it a permanent change? Is it temporary? Is your home environment suitable for teaching? Do you have a quiet space? Do you have enough time and the right equipment to actually be able to deliver and feel confident delivering online? So hopefully some of those barriers kind of jump out at you, and hopefully there's a couple there where you think actually that could be something that is affecting my organisation or something that I need to consider. And with a lot of these barriers, it's not always our job to remove the barrier. Sometimes our job is to acknowledge the barrier, and actually that's the first step. And then hopefully we begin to remove those barriers as an organisation, as a team. It's no one individual's job to remove those barriers, but acknowledging them is always the first step. So if we've got all these problems and we need to acknowledge the barriers and then begin to break down those barriers, or at least reduce them, then what assets do we have? What can we do in order to actually tackle that? So if you have a pen and paper handy and you are making notes throughout this webinar, then I would recommend to you to note down any of these that stand out to you and just consider which are your strongest assets. So one of the assets you might have in your organisation is technology. You may already have an established VLE, such as Google Classroom. You might be using Microsoft Teams or any of the other plethora of learning environments. Does it meet the needs of your staff and learners? Is it well adopted? Is it well received? Do people speak positively about it? If you have technology that you and your staff and your learners are comfortable with, that's a real asset. That's something you can build on. Another asset you might have is your staff. I know they're an asset generally, but in this context, in the context of online teaching, your staff are a really, really huge asset. Do you know what their needs are? Can you identify your pocket experts, and are they being well used for the benefit of other staff members as well? And when I say a pocket expert, what I mean is, does somebody have a standout skill in a very specific area of online teaching? So for example, online assessment, resource creation, a specific piece of software, engaging learners, handling low-level learners, ESOL learners. You will have staff who are well known for their skills in one specific area. It's a case of identifying those members of staff and encouraging sharing of good practice, which we'll look at a little bit later. So in terms of specifically your digital teaching expertise, this might be a real asset to you, and this could be, again, a springboard from which you can move forward. So in terms of the digital teaching expertise itself, do you have a mechanism for sharing those pocket experts that we identified in the staff asset? If you've got good ideas floating around there and help and offers of help and support from staff members and resources that are being created, are they being effectively shared? And if not, what might need to be in place to help that happen? In terms of the processes, are your processes clearly defined, and are staff being consistent in their approach? So for example, if you're using Google Meet versus Zoom versus Skype, is there one system so that learners are having a positive single experience with you as an organisation? Are the processes defined? Have you locked that down? And also obviously taking into account things like GDPR and so on. Have you got it really well defined so that tutors can feel safe in the process, feel that there's one way of doing things, and also share expertise with others who are doing it well? And lastly, your culture could be a huge asset to you. If your staff are positive about technology, do management set a good example? Do you use the tools that you're asking your staff, your teaching staff, to use? If you're modelling good practice, that has a huge impact. So with culture, what we're really aiming for is a digital first culture where technology is at the heart of everything. It's not an add-on. We're building it in so that we can use it to excel our learning forward rather than adding it on as a kind of, addition or a bonus. So we're looking for that really sort of embedded digital culture. So hopefully you can identify that some of those will be stronger than others, but the key here is to look at and saying which ones could we build on, which ones already should we be really proud of and we've already got in place, and which ones do we really need to focus attention on to improve. So for this activity, if we were in a group situation, obviously I would have you speak to colleagues, but you can do this individually through this webinar. But are you maximising the expertise you have? So I picked up on the previous slide that it's your staff expertise are one of the key things. It's your biggest asset. So the question is, how do your staff share knowledge and resources? I'd like to take a moment just to think in very practical terms how staff share their knowledge and resources in your organisation. I've put some suggestions there at the bottom of the slide, and I would just like you, again, if you're making notes, please note some down, but if not, just take a moment just to think about how that information spreads. If you don't know, then one key takeout from this webinar will be to go and find out how is it happening both within teams and cross teams within your organisation. So the way that we share knowledge and resources has a huge impact digitally, because if we provide a structure for our staff to share knowledge and resources via an organised digital mechanism, a proper digital route, what we do is we retain that information, which means we can reuse. And when it comes down to increasing our staff's knowledge, this concept of overwhelm means that it's not enough to just deliver information to your staff and hope that they get it first time, because the wave of information is so huge and so overwhelming. Our staff need to keep coming back to information. They need to loop. It's like a spiral curriculum. They need to keep coming back and developing in small steps every time in terms of increasing their skills. So you do need to have a mechanism where staff can share knowledge and resources on an ongoing basis, and you can keep re-signposting staff back to those good resources. So if you don't have, for example, a tutor intranet, or a shared classroom or a shared area, something like that, then I would encourage you to consider that. Also, lots of information is really well shared in more informal mechanisms. As we all know, that change is best when it happens organically. It comes from ground up rather than being management dictated down. So if there is appetite within your organisation to ensure that you have virtual coffee breaks, for example, best practice sharing in those kind of informal scenarios, then information can be shared very effectively, and it creates that sense of community that we know is so important with our learners, but is equally important with our staff, particularly when we're all working remotely, and it becomes so much more important to create a sense of community and a sense of team. So that was the thought exercise for you. So hopefully you can identify, again, some areas that might be worth considering. And just before we leave this slide, just to remind you that the more routes you can provide for staff to share resources, the better. Rather like when we're teaching online, it's so important that we provide learners with multiple routes to engage with us. So whether that's via chat, via voice, via the work that they hand in, things like that. Similarly with our staff, when we're asking them to share their knowledge and resources, we'll have some staff who will feel comfortable just posting things. We'll have some staff who are willing to present, and we'll have some staff who will only really be willing to share in a live environment. So just be mindful of all the different styles of interaction that your staff prefer, and try and offer choices for how these interactions can happen. So this survey was just again to get you thinking about what steps you're currently taking. So these are the things that you might be doing to encourage your staff to share resources. So are you asking questions of your staff? Are you surveying them for their needs and their wants and their skills? Are you using your experts? Have you identified mentors? Have you got people creating shared resources? Are you curating the tools that your staff are using? So are you sharing and providing lists of tried and trusted tools? Have you defined best practice? Have you been explicit about your processes? Have you provided a roadmap for your staff's digital skills development? Do staff know where they are on that roadmap? Are you making use of free CPD? Is that being shared regularly with staff? Have you embedded peer support, for example, via a VLE or shared area? And are you working to build a digital culture? Are your staff positive, collaborative, and curious, which are the key elements of a digital culture? So again, just self-assess yourself against that slide. Feel free to pause if you want to take some time to mark yourself on the scale from not implemented to thoroughly implemented, just to give yourself an idea and a visual of where it might be a good idea to focus your efforts. So the case study from Buckinghamshire Adult Learning in terms of where we were and where we are. So when we began, when the pandemic first hit, we had Google Classroom in place. We didn't have any online teaching. It was very much Google Classroom was being sort of positively received in pockets, but it was very much something that was sort of bubbling along, having replaced Moodle, but it was fairly new to us. So between April and December, we were busy. We surveyed the staff on training, technology needs and their confidence. Digital coaches were assigned for teams as a point of contact. We developed best practice and roadmap documents to try and position staff on where, on what they knew and where they wanted to be. We ran intense summer training courses for tutors, specifically on our learning environment, which happens to be Google, and on the best practices that we wanted them to follow. We set up a Google Classroom for resource sharing, peer support, and also to help direct tutors to the relevant CPD opportunities that were out there. We then built a tutor intranet with resources and online teaching support, including linking to the EIF. We did a toolbox for what good online teaching looks like and encouraged peer observations. And we've been steadily migrating processes to be collaborative to try and encourage that collaboration with documents and resources. And lastly, we planned training programs at multiple levels. So it wasn't a one size fits all. We tried to set different levels and encourage tutors from wherever their start point that we could take them on the next step in terms of their online and digital skills. So what do the practical steps look like? If you're trying to make a plan for how you're going to go from wherever you're starting, which might be a fantastic position, or it might be somewhere that you really feel, you've got a long way to go, but wherever you're beginning from, this is my suggestion to you for the practical steps for how to approach improving your staff's digital skills and moving them into the position of expert online teachers. So step 1, ask questions. Step 2, use your experts. 3, curate your tools. 4, define your best practice. 5, provide a roadmap. 6, make use of your free CPD. 7, embed peer support. 8, build a digital culture. And underlying all of that is support your learners, because that reduces pressure on your teaching staff. So for example, via an intranet or a helpline, and there are some digital ACE presentations on those topics. So do please look those up as well, about how you can support your digital low skilled learners, because it has a very big impact on your tutors' confidence and their ability to engage and teach online. So we're going to, for the next section of this webinar, we're going to step through these 8 steps and look at some practical examples of how other providers have implemented these practical steps. So we're just going to hop through them. Let's hope my links work. So in number 1, ask questions. And the key thing here is about surveying staff. So you want to do this regularly. And it's not just a one-off. You want to keep finding out what staff know and what they need. And the example that I've given you on the right is a stock take example. And I like this because it's very, very short, but it allows you to gain an awful lot of information from your staff in just a very, very short survey. And you'll see there, hopefully it's not too small on the screen, but for example, down the left-hand side, we've got some of the examples such as planning online lessons, preparing digital resources, using technology for feedback, for assessment, delivering to large groups, accessing support from colleagues, and managing IT issues during a live class. And then along the top, what we do is we ask staff whether they already know it, they can already do it well or not, whether they'd like to know more about it, whether it fits with their goals and interests or not. And it's by asking those sort of questions that we get a really good temperature check for which things as an organisation our tutors are either interested in, not interested in, need or don't need. And this is just a model that you're extremely welcome, obviously, to use if it's helpful to you. So the bonus benefits, when we survey our staff and when we do it regularly, the key things that we get out of that are firstly that we get to identify our experts. The other thing we get to do is we get to encourage self-reflection. And if you don't make these anonymous, which obviously I wouldn't recommend you do because you need to know where your staff needs are, then it allows for self-reflection. And if you do the same survey, obviously multiple times, you're not only going to encourage self-reflection, but you're going to be able to show progress as time goes on. And you will be able to measure the impact of the support that you put in place for your staff. So I highly recommend doing the work to get a really good survey that you know you can roll out every few months to then get a sense of whether or not you are making progress with your CPD and support of your staff. So the second step is to use your experts. Now, if you surveyed effectively in the first place, lots of you I know will already have surveyed very effectively and you'll know your experts. If you don't, then obviously you must survey first to find those experts, identify them, use them and leverage their skills. So once you've identified your experts, you can assign them roles. And again, this is lots of great examples of good practice happening across the industry, digital champions, coaches, mentors, technical support, whatever works for your organisation. But by assigning tutors an expert that they can use for ideas, for resources and for support is absolutely critical. And it takes away a lot of the fear and the overwhelm if you know you've got somebody that you can ask for help if it goes wrong. The other thing that's really helpful is to always be thinking long term, always be thinking permanent resources. So for example, if a member of staff helps another member of staff, is it possible that they can video those steps or the advice that they've given and record it and add it to your VLE? So it's about permanently capturing the support that's in place, because if one person has a question or is struggling with a certain thing, it is almost guaranteed that within your organisation somebody else will have the same issue. So really it's when you use your experts, try and encourage them not to do their help and their support behind closed doors. You're encouraging that anytime the help and support is given, or they find a useful resource, or somebody finds something that has helped get them out of a jam, it's a case of encouraging staff to share, because then you start to create this bank of resources, which benefits everybody. The other thing about using your experts, and the reason that I mentioned pocket experts up front, is that you need to seek out and celebrate not just good practice, but good progress. So even if you've got a tutor who is not particularly strong across the board, they might have one thing that they do superbly well. And it's celebrating those pockets of good practice is really, really important, and not putting too much pressure just on a few key experts. So really it's good practice and good progress that we're looking for to celebrate and make a big deal of and share those examples. In terms of defining your best practice, which we'll come on to in a minute, if you are using your experts effectively, they are your source of exemplar resources and templates. They are, if you're not sure what your best practice should be, it's your experts who will guide you for what kind of templates and exemplar approaches are going to work really well in your organisation. So use them for that as well. So number 3, coming back to our theme of overwhelm, is all about curating the tools. It's very easy if you Google for ideas to be immediately overwhelmed with the vast number of YouTube videos and websites that will give you thousands of amazing life-changing ideas, teaching ideas. And so many of them will not actually work particularly well in your organisation, or they might work well but might have subscriptions, things like that. So it's very difficult for busy staff and busy management to actually identify which tools are the best to invest your time in, because that's the key thing, is with any new technology, the investment required is time. Time to get to know the software, time to then introduce it to learners, time to then evaluate it and decide whether or not you're going to continue to use it. And that's a huge process that we're expecting tutors to do just as part of their job. So we can really help with that, to make that a manageable process by directing staff to some key tools that are tried and tested across our organisations. So once you define this manageable starter set of tools for your staff, you can then sit back and allow organic growth and allow those experts and those pocket experts and the people who share their resources to then bring out through the woodwork more tried and tested tools to add on, but start small. In terms of what my go-to set is for really, really excellent tools that I rely on and find fantastic and find very accessible, regardless of tutor level, are the following four. Screencastify, which is video recording software, which is free forever with a 5-minute limit, which is adequate for short videos. Wordwall, which is really useful for a plethora of things. Mentimeter, which is superb and very quick and easy to use for surveys, questions, temperature checks, exit tickets, all of that good stuff. And lastly, online whiteboarding. So such as Jamboard, obviously you've got it integrated into Zoom as well. So you've got a few options there, but online whiteboarding is really excellent and again, very easily accessible and helps with learner engagement. And that's the key thing with this manageable starter set, is that it's all about learner engagement. And you might be using those or equivalents already, but if you don't have that starter set defined in your organization, then I highly recommend looking into these particular tools as a start point. So the next thing that we have to do is we have to define our best practice. I'm going to show you our example for how we defined our best practice approach. And what we tried to do was break it down by software so that it became really, really clear where you had to begin and where you could get to on the route. So by defining this, benefits that it has is that you get staff buy-in, because it's now very clear that there's a pathway to excellence and there's a place that you can be, and wherever you are, you know what the next step is. If you use this in conjunction with your surveys, it's going to help you to track development and track the quality of what's being delivered in your organisation. So just to give an example then, for us, step one was to use Google Classroom as the online learning hub. Step two was to add on Google Meet and add on the live classes. Step three was to leverage Google applications like slides, forms, docs, things like that. And then step four was the kind of whizzy bits on top, the tools and extensions. So using some of those excellent tools like Keep, Sites, Jam, things like that. And all of that was underpinned by our sort of workhorse applications, Calendar, Drive and Gmail. So things that just sit underneath all of those teaching applications. The next step then, if we've surveyed our staff, we know who our experts are, we've given them a starter set of tools that we know are good, we've defined our best practice, the next thing we need to do is we need to provide a roadmap for staff to help identify their training needs and where they need to go next. So here's an example roadmap. What we've done here, and obviously this won't suit everybody, but it's absolutely amendable, is that we've got 3 levels: adopt, explore, embed, and then across the top we've got the actual area where you would use this, so structure, communication, resources, demonstration, assessment and feedback. And then within the boxes in the table, what we've got is practical examples of how it might look if you're at that particular level. So for example, if you're at the adopt level in structure, you may have set up a virtual classroom. So obviously in our case, it's Google Classroom, but you know, depending on what you're using, it will look a little bit different, but that's an example of adopting. As you then go through, if you're embedding structure, you might now be organizing your documents effectively on Drive, as well as using Classroom. You'd also be using Sheets, Docs and Slides for most of your tasks. So you'd really be kind of embedding that structure and using the Google tools in that way. As another example, then, if we take feedback, you could be, if you're adopting, you may be typing feedback to learners in just a message, or you might be just vocally delivering it via a video call. And that would just be that you're adopting, you're using technology to deliver feedback and the feedback itself is being delivered in a fairly traditional way. You're just changing the mechanism of doing that by using the technology. If we then fast forward down to embedding, you might then actually be embedding video and audio feedback into learner work very directly, or using interactive tools in order to deliver feedback in real time. So the key thing is with the training roadmap is that what we're looking for is to try and recognize spiky profiles in our staff. So if we ask staff to self-assess using a training roadmap, what we should see is that staff typically are going to be adopting in some areas, exploring in others, and embedding in others. And it helps staff to identify their training needs. If they're at the adopting stage with some of these areas, then it shows where your training needs are and where you can identify opportunities to provide focused training. It also helps to build confidence when people can see that actually they're doing some quite advanced stuff. It also helps to really boost people's confidence with that. And giving a practical example of what does really, really great practice look like is very helpful, because when we're all working in silos, it becomes much more difficult to identify what does good online teaching look like if your staff have not been doing it before, which obviously in the main, it's fairly new to most of us. So let's move on to step 6. This is a really easy one. You'll know about all of these, I'm sure, but you need to use free CPD and direct to free CPD. But I do need to caution that curating remains important. There is a real risk of feeling that we've provided free CPD by sending loads of links to our tutors who are already struggling with lack of time and trying to adapt to an online teaching environment. So it's very important to curate the resources and to direct very specifically. But here is my go-to list for good quality CPD, depending on your needs. But I recommend not sharing just the overall links. You need to really look into these CPD opportunities and then tailor them to your staff's needs based on your surveys and your training roadmaps. So Holex Digital Ace, obviously, that you'll be aware of. There are loads of resources there which are really fantastic. ETF Enhance has got fantastic resources with a badge system for improving digital skills. FutureLearn and Open University are excellent on the pedagogy in terms of really understanding online teaching. And then Google and Microsoft both have huge resources there for actual specifics to do with the platforms. So do have a look at those as well. So number 7, embedding peer support, we've touched on already in the previous activity, but ways that we can provide peer support, really it comes down to trying to help do everything bite-size. So bite-size how-tos, drop-in coffee mornings for just sharing issues and batting around ideas for solutions, encouraging co-teaching and peer support. There are some great examples that I've heard, for example, having a digital teaching expert to shadow and support in the first couple of lessons of courses, things like that are fantastic examples of best practice. The key thing is with this, just I can't go on about this enough really, is to make sure that when your experts are delivering support, they are capturing that support and they are sharing. So for example, we've just got examples here from our VLE. So obviously we capture tips and tricks there for example, basics of using Google Classroom and Meet. But another thing is a set of video guides. So for example, video guides obviously are very good and easily accessible. It's lovely to see a colleague actually demonstrate something. That's sometimes a lot easier to access. And so we have an index of video guides. So every time somebody creates a how-to guide, it goes into the index and means that if it's like an FAQ, but an FAQ of just video clips, short video clips that you can access just to see how to do things, which is really great. So by building these resource banks, it's easily scalable. And you start to encourage that organic peer-to-peer training, which is what is so much more effective than just top-down delivery. So lastly, our lofty ambition is obviously to build a digital culture. So a digital culture is positive, collaborative and curious. And that's what we're really aiming for. And so the way that we do that in practical terms is we recognise our champions. We set a good example, and within management, we use the technology and we're positive about the technology. And I'd like to introduce you to the 3 E's model of building a digital culture. So we enthuse, we're positive about technology and about the opportunities it brings for us as individuals, for our staff as a whole, for our organisation, and most importantly, for our learners. We empower people through technology. We're collaborative. We don't hoard resources. We encourage sharing and we give credit where it's due. And lastly, final E, and the most important one, is we expect problems. And this is what taps into the curious, that's interesting. I wonder why that went wrong. And it's that sensation with building a digital culture. We expect problems. It will be difficult. We are dealing with staff and learners on multiple devices, different devices, and we have to cope with that. And it's really, really tough. But if we expect problems and we're curious about why they happen and we're curious about how we can solve them, then that goes a really long way to building a positive digital culture. So thank you for listening, and I hope that that has given you some ideas and practical examples for how you can begin to move your staff to expert. And wherever you are on your journey with online teaching, I hope that you feel encouraged to take the next step and continue to develop and progress.